This is the Motivated Business Show, hosted by me, Mark Terrell, the author of Motivated, the Reluctant Leader's Guide to Building a Business That Sets You Free. In my book, I share the 7-step process to get the measure of your business. MEASURE is an acronym that stands for Mirror, Evaluate, Action, Systemize, Unify, Review, and Energize. On each episode, I'll be chatting to a business owner about how they stay motivated and how they've got the measure of their business. So without further ado, let's find out who's joining me on this episode. Hello and welcome to this edition of the Motivated Business Show with me, Mark Terrell. Today's guest, she's in HR, but I with what I've heard with regards to the things that she talks about, she has a mindset around HR and a particular thing that she wants to address, which I won't go into too much detail now, but obviously we'll be talking about that in a short while. Before we do that, let's mention the book, which I will be mentioning later. In my book, I talk about a 7-step process, and I will be referring to that a bit later. And you can get a copy of that book if you buy me a couple of coffees. And to do that, you can click on that QR code, buy me a couple of coffees, and I will send you a copy of my book. And if you would just like to contribute to the podcast, just keep it going because you've got some value. Then again, if you just buy me one coffee, that's greatly received, and also just keeps the wheels in motion with regards to the podcast. So if you could do that, that would be much appreciated. Right, let's crack on and bring on today's guest. Welcome, Maritsa.
Hi, good morning. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for giving up your time today. Before we do get into the conversation, let's give you the opportunity to introduce yourself properly.
Yeah, of course. So good morning, everyone. My name is Maritsa. My business is M.E.A.S.U.R.E Consulting Limited. And I guess in a nutshell, the best way to describe what I do is I help business owners to stop their best employees from leaving their business unnecessarily. I've been in HR for over 20 years now, and been in my own business for about 4 years. So lots of experience, lots of different things that I've handled in the past. Now helping businesses directly myself.
Brilliant stuff. So going back in the day when I was employing 45 staff, one person leaving was at the bane of my life because it always seemed to happen at the wrong time. So you don't want people to leave. But then there is some times when you do want people to leave. Let's not go into that in too much detail. But why should we be focusing particularly on preventing people leaving?
Well, ultimately, it costs businesses a lot of money to replace staff. It's actually cheaper to retain than it is to replace employees. The initiatives that you could put in place as a business owner to keep your people happy, essentially, are actually much cheaper than filling a vacancy that's been created by someone leaving. So based on data and stats that are out there, it can take up to, anything between 3 to 24 months to fill a vacancy that has been created by someone leaving unnecessarily. And so, that can cost quite a lot of money based on the average UK salary, and let's say 6 months that it takes to fill a vacancy, that's approximately £17,500. So it is quite expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is it's not. It's all right. No, there's a bit of delay. So Maritsa's in Greece, so there is a little bit more of delay. So we might struggle a little bit more than we normally do. But what I was going to say was that it is obviously a costly experience when someone has left and you've got to replace them. There's the cost of recruitment, but not only that, you've got the cost of the time it takes to do that as well, and the disruption to the business, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. The amount of time, not just the time that it takes to fill, it's the time that it takes, different individuals from the business to help in filling that vacancy, whether it's because they are sifting through the applications or spending some time pre-screening candidates, or, when you get to really senior positions, even the CEO or that business owner gets involved, and their time is probably the most expensive in the business. And so you want to kind of mitigate that as much as you can. Yeah.
Okay, so what are the things that we should be thinking about with regards to preventing people leaving? What are the things that typically people leave the business for, and what are the
Yeah.
things that we can actually prevent?
Yeah, so usually I find people leave because of the work, the company, or the culture. And so what you should focus on is really those things. So when I say the work, it's typically things like, even not having enough work to do or being stimulated is also not a great thing. But making sure, high performers want to grow and develop, and they want to be in a role where they're able to do that. And if you aren't able to facilitate that in some way, then people start getting bored, and they obviously start looking elsewhere. But even something as simple as, helping that individual to make the connection between the role that they do and how it helps the business to make money is really, really important as well. It helps to provide a bigger picture, but also to get that person to understand why what they do is actually really important. Looking then at other things that, other reasons that may cause somebody to leave, I talk about reward, and that's not necessarily just the salary. Sure, money is quite a big motivator, but I'm talking about it as a whole. So any benefits, any additional, let's say, compensation, and that doesn't have to be monetary, that an individual receives when they work for your business. Now, sure, I'm not saying that every business needs to have a really, really comprehensive private medical scheme or critical illness or death in service. There's different things that you can put in place that still make you quite competitive without needing to spend a fortune on benefits. So, those are some other things to consider. And then really, I think, Mark, we've talked about this before. It's that piece around people typically leaving their manager rather than the business. And so really ensuring that anyone who leads a team, whether they're a supervisor, a leader, or a manager, or even a senior leader, that there is some alignment in terms of how things are done, but also of a good sort of baseline of understanding of, okay, well, this is how I manage people and do it well. Oftentimes I've found that people get promoted very much on technical skill, but not necessarily the behavioral ability and the soft skills that are needed to be a good manager. And so really focusing on those skills that are required, and enabling anyone who leads a team, regardless of the size, to know how to do that well.
Yeah, that's so often, isn't it, that people are promoted? It's almost like they're given a job that they deserve, and then actually, then they realise
Yeah.
that what did I do to deserve this? Because I was quite good at what I used to do, and now I've got all these this team to lead, and
Yeah.
I have not got a clue. And I've been part of that sort of process as well, and not really being prepared. So how do we prevent that from happening then? So you're all about prevention. So how do we gear people up to, if they are going to be stepping into leading a team, so they don't make those mistakes, so people leave? What can we do about that?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things that, because you could say, oh, just people manager training, but one of the key things I think that some people manager training doesn't include are things like, okay, well, how do I make that step from being someone's friend to then having to manage them, and how do I do it well, and how do I set those boundaries? So it's almost a combination of things. So one is that I'm allowed to set boundaries, and it's okay. Being in an environment and in a business culture where that's acceptable. But secondly, also just I think even just saying that it's okay to do this, and it's okay to have a conversation with someone that you used to be friends with. That actually, this is how I envisage this going. Just helping people along to, I guess, enhance that relationship that already exists, but also to know what is and what isn't okay, in day to day. So that will be one thing. I think just some of the basics and understanding of the touch points that people have through their employee life cycle. So, a lot of focus sometimes is placed on things like recruitment and onboarding, and rightly so, because those are the biggest hitters, let's say, but also where the investment makes the biggest impact. So you're not hiring people, you're not sort of mishiring people or setting people up to fail. But there's also a whole load of other stuff that happens when an employee is an employee, including life things, but also, just through the very nature of being an employee, promotions. They might have to go through a performance process, or, they might be wanting to take a sabbatical or something. But it's just helping people managers to be really, really clear on, okay, well, what is available, but also how do we support people through these different things. And then, of course, there's the life layer on top as well. And, people go through marriages, breakups, divorces, babies, deaths, whatever it might be. And so it's really important to think about that experience that an employee experiences as a whole, and making sure that managers realize the crucial role that they play throughout. Yeah, that's probably the best way that I can describe it as
Yeah.
a really well-rounded.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots to
I guess.
lots to consider, isn't there? But ultimately, what we want to do is keep everyone engaged, isn't it? And there's a lot talked about employee engagement, and I'm sure it's one of the things that you talk a lot about as well. So, how do you sort of talk about engagement and keeping people engaged in what they're doing?
I think it's all of the things that we've just spoken about, really. So making sure that they can see that connection to the bigger picture. They know as well what development opportunities are. They are set up to succeed when they first join. And then, there's a discussion about development, so other way around. But yeah, there's a discussion around, sort of what their aspirations are, what are the potential opportunities in the business as well. Because it's all very well the individual saying, oh, I want to do X, Y, Z. But actually, if there isn't the facility to do that, well, okay, let's have a discussion about how we could achieve that, or could achieve something close to that. So, it's that constant sort of checking in, open dialogue, two-way communication, giving feedback. So that's another critical thing, is where what helps to motivate people is when they know that their feedback and their opinions are heard and they're appreciated. So that would be another critical thing, regularly eliciting feedback from employees, but then actually acting on it and saying, hey, you said this, we've done this, and being almost very almost over communicating, especially in the world where we're hybrid or remote working and things like that. It's just really making that very clear that we're not just sending around a survey and then just putting it in the proverbial drawer.
Yeah,
That
it's
really.
so important because everyone wants to be appreciated, don't they? You always remember that. If you can show some appreciation, it goes a long way, and it's a big reward to some people as well. And we talk about what people want to come to work for and the rewards they want. There can't be anything more important than actually being appreciated for what you do and getting noticed. So a lot of people come to work and never get noticed. I always remember somebody in my early days when I was starting coaching and realised that this person was motivated by making a difference and they didn't think they made any difference whatsoever. So I said, check your feedback and see what happens. And then next time I met with her, she said, oh, I do make a difference because I do this, that and the other. And I said, and just by connecting to the difference they make,
Yes.
and actually connecting to that outcome was the importance. And a lot of people
Yes.
get disconnected from that outcome, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another critical role of a people manager, let's say, like a leader, is to make sure that they're continuing and making that connection, and allowing that to happen, but also allowing it to happen in a way that isn't forced or stifled equally. It's about, I know I can speak up and say what I think. Okay, obviously not being harsh or unfair or anything like that, but I can speak quite freely and give my feedback quite freely because I know actually that's the environment that we're in, and I'm not going to be penalised for that in any way. So yeah, that's really really important because it makes people feel part of a bigger thing, a bigger. I hate the word family, but it is, you start to build connections in
Mhm.
between, everyone in a business. And so knowing that, we are able to speak freely and we have that environment of collaboration and of feedback, that's hugely important.
Yeah. So what we've been talking about here really is essentially the experience that people have at work, isn't it? And the importance of the experience on an individual basis. Because remembering that different people come to work for different things. So how do we manage that sort of cycle with regards to, obviously we talked a lot about, well, a little bit about onboarding and recruitment and all those sort of things. So
Yes.
how does that sort of pan out with regards to when someone joins and, ultimately if they do leave and they have to leave, then there's a sort of a cycle that we have to sort of follow, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really the key thing or the key advice I give is to um, think about, just like you would for a customer, think about your employee as a customer and put yourself in their shoes and try and anticipate their needs, anticipate what questions they might have. For example, recruitment and onboarding is a classic, but onboarding especially, I talk a lot about anticipating needs. What might somebody need to know when they join that everyone else knows because they picked it up, but actually it might not be that obvious, and it's not written down anywhere. Similarly, with the not so nice stuff, talking about the employee life cycle, when you're going through a performance process or, even a disciplinary process or a redundancy process, it's making sure as a business owner, leader, manager, whatever it might be, that you are remembering that there's an individual in that process and that they most likely will have questions. Um, what is happening? What does this mean? What's the next steps? How will this affect me? And just trying to sort of remember that there's a human being behind that, and accounting for that and trying to make things that perhaps aren't very pleasant as smooth as possible,
Yeah.
so that people recognize and feel that they are supported and that, okay, it's not a great scenario that they're in, but I know that I'm being treated fairly. It's very very transparent what's happening to me, and the process that's being followed, and actually I trust that this will be run in a really fair way. um, so those are the sorts of things. I think transparency is quite undervalued, as a skill in an organization, and just helping people to understand what's next and the impact to them makes a huge difference, from an experience perspective.
I think another undervalued skill is explicitness, actually being really clear about what you want,
Yes,
especially as a
absolutely.
leader, and spelling it out so everyone's just crystal clear with regards to. I think we tend to be vague in many of the things that we say, and then wonder why what happens is not quite what we want, and it's probably because of the way we communicate. We weren't really explicit enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think expectation setting is really, really important, and just being very clear actually what the output is. So, for example, it's talked a lot about in relation to remote working, but I think, it's that piece around being very clear about what a role delivers and what the output is rather than how long they spend doing that. And so
Hmm.
when you go through a process or an exercise of trying to articulate what that great looks like and what great delivery looks like, that's when, you kind of understand, okay, that's the real contribution that the role makes into the bottom line. But then it's going that next step further and being able to articulate that and articulate it really well to the individual. So actually, this is what is expected of you, and this is what a great, I don't know, accounts payable assistant is like. This is what a great role would look like, or great performance would look like in this role. So it's kind of like helping to piece those pieces of the puzzle together, and not making it sort of a mystery.
Yeah, yeah. Let's move on a little bit to regards to the way you work and how what does the typical person say to you before they start working with you? What are their pains, their problems that lead them to you, and then sort of how does that sort of process work?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the key things that I hear business owners saying is that, what are we doing so terrible that makes our people want to leave? So they're experiencing a high volume of leavers. So that could be anything from maybe one every couple of months to one every month, depending on the size of the organization. They also might, they've come to me saying, we're okay with recruiting people and onboarding them, but actually they're not staying for longer than 3 to 6 months, which really, it's not okay. There's obviously something going wrong there. But also sometimes people say things like, we've got problem vacancies, we can't find the right candidates, we're not quite sure what's happening, what's going on. So that's in relation to the turnover. Sometimes I also work with people who, and I can help both, but people where they say that, we're a small organisation, we have grown in the past, we want to 3 times, 5 times our growth in the next 2 to 3 years. We know we need some HR stuff in place. We want to make sure our people get a great experience, but we don't really know where to start. So yeah, those are the kinds of things. But I also have clients who want to work with me on an hourly basis because they specifically want some help with a very particular employee matter, or a particular project, for example, implementation of a HR system.
Right, excellent. Because such a variety of ways that HR can help a business. That's the important thing. And what
Absolutely.
I see
Yeah.
as the benefits, because there's a benefit. Was the trouble with, I think in most cases HR is seen as the problem solvers. There's a people problem. Give it to HR. Well, really, it
Yeah.
should be the other way around. HR should be the where they're helping the business with regards to, as you talk about, preventing people leaving. How can we do things better? How can we do things so
Yes.
people are performing at their best? They come to work and all those things that are good for the business, and not just to be the problem solver. So what we're talking about here is more rather being a reactive service. That in most cases, I think HR is treated. It should be more of a proactive service, shouldn't it? It should be okay, we need someone who can show us how to get the best out of everybody that works here, and make sure that they are not leaving unnecessarily, like you've already talked about.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, again, talking back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is that there is a huge cost with associated with that, and similarly, there's a huge cost there's a huge cost of doing things reactively versus proactively. Proactive, it doesn't take as much to move the needle to become very positive, whereas reactive, you've got much more that you need to do to improve that relationship or improve matters. And so there's one thing, but also I think, and it's something that I've felt right from the beginning of my career, is that we spend too much time at work. Whether you're a business owner or an employee, we spend so much time at work, and it's important, certainly for me and how I try and work with my clients, is that it's important to have some fun as well, and actually for it to be enjoyable, and not to be, oh my gosh, what's the Monday morning problem this week, with regards to my people. It's that actually, if you do things well the first time round, sure, there's a learning curve, but if you do do things well, and that's how you continue to work on that proactive basis and treating, your employees like customers and giving them a great experience. It's not just pink and fluffy. It actually has there are some really, really big benefits to the business, not just financial.
Absolutely. Right. Time's flying by. So, Maritsa, I'm going to give you the time to just sit back and I'm going to share a few things that have come up in the conversation. I like to sort of bring the 7-step model into and connect it to the things that we've discussed. So, as always, understanding ourselves is always important, and that's where the mirror is the first step in the process. But what I don't spend a lot of time talking on the podcast, because is these last 3 sections, which are very much around team development. And in particular, I think today is about this, what I talk about in the Energize, is that when you are managing people, if you have been lucky enough to be promoted to manage a team, then there's 2 things to take into account with regards to how do you turn up best, with regards to how you perform best. So firstly, making sure that your energy levels are high. And then you've got to think about, well, how do I do that for my team? And so the Energize, we talk about actually the rewards people come to work for. And not surprisingly, motivational maps play a role in that. And so the 9 motivations to work, just so if you haven't heard them, we talk about it before, we all have all 9 motivators, but we have them all in different orders. And so we need to put them in the right order for us. And once we do that, then we can make sure those things that are most important to us are being fulfilled in our work. So I'm going to share with you what we call the 22 numbers today. So this is the background data from a motivational map. So what this gives us is a few things. It gives us the scores for each of the motivators. So the score is the importance. So the higher the score, the more important the motivator is for the individual. It also gives us what we call the PMA scores, which is that essentially out of 10, how well is that motivator currently being fulfilled? So this is really important, because if we're talking about employees leaving, then if they're likely to leave, then it's probably because the things that they come to work for are not being fulfilled. So in this instance, we tend to look at the top 3 motivators. And so in this instance, this person comes to work to make a difference, have opportunities to learn and to also share knowledge, and also they want to be well rewarded financially. And what we can also tell is that those motivators, well, they're not being particularly well met. Only 3 out of 10 for their top motivator, 5 out of 10 for expert, and 6 out of 10 for builder. So there's a lot we can do to say, right, okay, how can we give you more of those things? How can we make you more fulfilled in those things? And the searcher is an interesting one, actually, in that what is the searcher about? The searcher is about making a difference. So how do we make someone feel they're making a difference? We've got to tell them. We've got to give them the feedback. You've already talked about them, Maritsa, haven't we? People want to know they're making a difference. Yeah, and the only way they can feel they're making a difference tends to be either from their manager or the person that leads them, or from their client and the people that they work with or their team. So Searcher is about reaching out and feeling that you are making a difference and being able to connect what you do to the difference you make.
Absolutely. And I think for those, just a quick one to add, is that for those people who don't have that direct feedback from a client, it's even more important, isn't it, to then be able to have a manager or a leader that's really, really clearly explaining that connection between the two, isn't it, and the contribution that they're making.
Yeah, well, a lot of people do things that they don't really know the reason for. And that's another thing that we've got to make sure is if they're asked to do something, it's important to tell them why they're doing it and why it's important to the overall outcome. And not only why they're doing it, also tell them why doing it a different way will not be helpful. So being explicit with regards to this is the way we do it.
Yes.
Because if we don't do it that way, if we do it this way, then that causes problems down the lines. Just so that you understand, there is that way you could do it, but if you do it that way, it really has a knock-on effect. So it's about really being explicit with regards to how things are done in that respect.
Yeah. Brilliant. Fantastic. Yeah, it's such a useful tool. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a good insight with regards to how people are feeling about their role. That's the important thing. So, Maritsa, we're running out of time. Just before you go, then tell us a little bit more about why you do what you do and what you might get up to when you're not solving your clients' problems.
Yeah, so I like I said, I think it started right at the beginning of my career. We spend so much time at work. There's got to be a way that it's got to be a lot more enjoyable for people, everyone involved in it. And so that's kind of I guess, my little mission in life, in my working life.
Great.
When I'm not working, so I live in Greece permanently. I support my clients remotely, fully remotely. I'm usually doing something music related. So I DJ and I co-manage an online radio station, which is a lot of fun. And my husband makes music as well, so I try and kind of help him out every now and then.
Wow, how exciting! So great. That sounds very exciting. I need to find out a bit more about that, but probably not just at the moment when we're just going to wrap up the podcast. So thank you for your time today. It's been really interesting. As
Thanks so much for having me.
the time flies by. There's so much that we can talk about. We've talked about these things in the conversations we've had in our networking group, and we're going to have a bit of a proper one-to-one shortly to just to delve a bit more into these things, because it's so important. As you say, people want to come to work to enjoy themselves, have fulfilling lives in the workplace, and all we can do to make that happen, then the better, as far as I'm concerned. And obviously how you've described it as well is important to you.
Yeah,
great
absolutely,
stuff.
Absolutely.
Thanks again.
Thanks.
We'll catch up very soon. There we are. Thank you for Maritsa for her time today, and you can see what she does. She has a passion about preventing people leaving unnecessarily. So if that is one of the things that you are struggling with, you've got people that are leaving the organisation, your business, and you don't know why, then Maritsa can help you with that. And just before we go then, just to remind you of the book, I share the 7-step model. There's a chapter for each of the 7 steps, and there's also 2 other steps in the book that I talk about. So there's 9 chapters, and the first 2, actually I don't talk about enough really. Is important to enjoy the journey if you're running a business, and also to look after yourself, making sure that you're feeling good about yourself, looking after the things that are important to you, being active and healthy and all those sort of things. So talk about that, because ultimately, what's the point of having a business if ultimately your health is suffering because of it? So there we are. That's the book. As I mentioned before, you can contribute to either the podcast, or if you buy me 2 coffees by using this QR code or the link in the comments, then I will send you a copy of my book. And anything like that helps to keep the wheels in motion with regards to the podcast, and your contribution is much appreciated. So there we are. That's today's episode done and dusted. Thank you for those that joined us live. And if you catch us on replay, don't hesitate to leave a comment for myself or for Maritsa, and we will be delighted to answer any questions or any comments that you have about the topics that we've discussed. So that's it. Have a great day, and I will see you very soon on the next episode of the Motivated Business Show.